room I'm in, for some reason, it absolutely stinks of gas. Why are we learning that in year 2 if we never learn it, if we never do anything on it again in year 3? And I always think that's a bit of a poor setup from schools. It was like 15 kids stood up, and I was like, hang on, what's going on here? Half the time people just don't actually understand what PESSPA is. Hello everybody and welcome back to another Let's Talk uSports podcast. This is the third podcast that we've done so far, and this is a podcast where we as sports coaches, as PE teachers, all come together to talk school sport. And in today's episode we're going to be talking about PESSPA. What is PESSPA? But I must make you aware at the moment, the room I'm in, for some reason it absolutely stinks of gas, and I'm hoping I can make it to the end of this podcast without getting interrupted or without passing out. We'll see how we get on. But if you haven't watched the podcast already, my name's Charlie Hiscox. I run a sports coaching business here in the Thames Valley. We work with over 100 primary schools now, and we deliver a lot of PE, lunch clubs, after school clubs. And the sector that we work in is called the PESSPA sector. And for you to understand what each of those sectors are and understand them in more detail, I think it's better for us just to break down what PESSPA is first. So PESSPA is short for physical education, school sports and physical activity. We've got 3 different areas within the PESSPA sector. So the first one being PE, and that's your PE lessons, your long-term curriculum, short-term curriculum, thinking about what children are actually learning within PE lessons at your school. And then you've got SS, school sports, and that is more inter-school competitions or intra-school competitions. That's where sports days, we might be talking about sports days, or little inter-school friendly football matches after school, whatever that is. Just basically more the competitive side and actually understanding the different sporting competitive elements. And then physical activity is, are your children active? How are you allowing your children the opportunity to be active within your school? And that might be encouraging children to walk into school. It might be looking at what do the children do at lunchtime. What do they do in terms of a daily mile? Do they have any daily mile strategies in, or whatever it is? Just anything that promotes activity and movement within the school day. And the first one we're going to talk about within those 3 sectors is physical education. And within that, I think we can talk short-term, medium and long-term. And I could probably go on for hours on this one, but let's just try and make it simple, right? So if I'm in a primary school and I am looking at the sport within that school, from a long-term point of view, I'm looking at, if you are a child who joins in foundation and year R, what is your progress like from foundation all the way through to year 6? Does it gradually progress, and does it gradually move up within the school, or is it very disjointed and sort of doesn't? Why are we learning that in year 2 if we never learn it, if we never do anything on it again in year 3, and so on? So thinking about how you can actually get like a clear progression for a child within the school. And I think there's obviously a number of different ways to do that. But the first one has to be that you have like a pedagogy around your teaching, a belief around physical education within your school. And my belief within a school should be that every child has the potential to get better and physically learn within their PE lessons. And if we can approach that in every way, so we're looking at any child within the school, so whether they're an elite player who's extremely good at football, and say they're playing in a football academy on the weekends, or you've got someone who is maybe got learning difficulties, or you've got different physical disabilities. And thinking about every child within that, how do you actually get them to progress and learn within the school, within the 6 years or whatever it is that they're with you? And when you look at that and think about, right, well, what does that need? Well, it needs to have a whole long-term curriculum map. So what do we learn in year R? What does that lead into in year 1 and year 2? And how does that progress up to year 6? But also you've got to think about your planning, because is it that everything is actually synced up? And for example, say if I'm in a school and everything is about, right, we are going to make sure that everybody learns about about physical movements. There's a lot of repetition, and children learn their locomotor skills, they learn their stability skills, and they learn their manipulation skills. So they are a physically competent child. Well, that's really good if you're working on that in foundation. But then if you just completely ignore it and just do outdoor team sports from year 1 to year 6, well, that's a bit of a disjointed curriculum. So thinking about that curriculum there, and the lesson plans should align with that. So if we are a school that relies on a lot of repetition, well, we should see that in our foundation classes all the way through up to year 6. And there's different ways you can do that. So some schools will use an outsourced PE lesson plan software, and there's lots of different softwares out there, and some of them are really good and some of them are really not that good. And we as a sports coaching company often go into a school and we're told, oh, you need to use these lesson plans from this lesson plan provider, and we literally, everyone in the office go, oh, their heads drop, because you think, oh no, the coach isn't going to like that, and the teachers don't like it. And but there's other ones where everyone goes, yes, you've got that company, and that's a lot easier. But also some schools you work in, they've got their own lesson plan, they've created their own lesson plan. Maybe they've employed a PE lead who has spent a lot of time working on all those different lesson plans, and as long as the same person has done it and the same pedagogy has been followed and the same philosophy has been followed through all of the lesson plan designs, then what you should get is quite a synced up curriculum that works nicely. And what, especially for us as a sports coaching company, what you don't want is a sports coaching company coming into your school, and say you use one company for 2 years and you use a different company for 1 year, and whenever they're in, you're just leaving them to use their own lesson plans. Well, how is there any chronological sort of progression for that child? Because we as a sports coaching company might come in and say, well, all right, fine, if you are leaving it to us, year 3s are going to do X, Y, and Z, and then another company comes in further down the line, and then they go, all right, yeah, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but they do that in year 5. So that child has already learnt it all in year 3, and then has to redo it in year 5. So I always think that's a bit of a poor setup from schools. If you're bringing in a external company, I think it's always better to give them a curriculum that you work to and lesson plans that you work to, just to allow for that actual progression for a child. It doesn't really matter who's teaching them, because you've got the structure in place. So that's obviously your long-term structure of PE lessons. And then you can look at medium and shorter term. Well, medium term, are we actually assessing children at the end of each term or each year, whatever it is? But if you are assessing them, how are you assessing them? Are you assessing them on how far they can jump? Which, if you're a 6 foot year 6, which sometimes you come across, maybe not 6 foot, but you get the point. If you're comparing a 6 foot child to a 4 foot child, well, the 6 foot child can jump further. Does it mean they're better? No, it just means they can jump further because physically they're taller. So when we are assessing, are we actually looking at how much progression they've individually made? And that's quite hard because you've got a lot of different children to evaluate. But if you've got a good assessing structure in place, then you can do that. So that's going to be more medium term. And then I think within medium term also comes into play is, have you got the right equipment? Because there's nothing worse than being given a lesson plan which says you need 30 netballs or 15 netballs, and you're passing netballs around, and then you go to the PE cupboard and there's 3 netballs in there and they're flat. It's just like, well, then that whole journey from that foundation to year 6 is disrupted because there's not enough time being put in place for the equipment. It's all good having the structure there, but it's the actual realities of, does everybody know where the PE key is? Do the netballs get put back in the right place? All that sort of stuff. Because if you don't have it, you end up with a disjointed curriculum, and they go, all right, we'll just do tennis this week or whatever, and the whole thing looks good on paper, but practically for the children, it doesn't actually get them to where they need to be. And then you can take it even shorter term. If I was a head teacher, or like I am a business owner, if I go out and see my coaches, am I seeing good delivery? Am I seeing what I expect? How is the behaviour management? How is the actual delivery of the sessions? Are we seeing massive, and you do see it, 15v15 a basketball match where only 2 or 3 kids are actually touching the ball? Or are you seeing lots of small-sided games where there's lots of progression? Every child in the session is actually getting time on the ball. It might be in gymnastics. Is it that the same kid is always being used for the demonstration and it's actually negatively impacting some of the other kids who are trying really hard but aren't getting the attention? Whatever it is, just thinking about, right, on the short-term level, is each lesson that's being taken place delivered at the right structure? And so you can look at that as a PE teacher thinking, right, okay, well, is my school doing this? Does it look good on paper? Yes. Does it look good practically? Yes, where you're onto a winner. But also, if you're a sports coach going into a school, and you might be only in that one school for 2 terms or whatever it is, do you understand the reason why you shouldn't just be doing your own sessions and why you should be sort of working with the school, making sure that the curriculum is followed to allow that child to have a positive journey all the way through the school? So that's PE. Obviously, you could talk loads about PE and just keep going on about all the different areas within PE, but I won't. I'll save that for another podcast. Which moves us into school sport. And school sport is an interesting one. School sport is often seen as the best children in the school are competing at a good level, and the school looks good externally. They're winning tournaments or they're winning matches or whatever. But that doesn't look, when you actually look deeper into it and scratch away from the surface, that doesn't really constitute to what good school sport looks like. Because yes, it's important that you're giving your most capable children the opportunity to compete and have a positive experience in sport, but every child ideally should be competing at some level, and that might mean that you might not have inter-school matches or competitions, but it might be that you have, on your sports days, it's not just one day where you opt for one thing. It's more of a case of a whole, all the way through the year. I work with some schools where they have actual everybody's in houses and every house competes in a tag rugby tournament or a dance tournament or gymnastics tournament, and that's sometimes something you don't see. You often get the football and the team sports, but you don't see as many like dance and gymnastics and swimming competitions. And when a school can look at all the different parts of their curriculum and think about, right, how can we make this competitive? Does it need to be external, work with other schools? Can it be internal? And just try and give as many children as possible the chance to take part competitively and play to win, but it's not win at all costs. And that's something I often talk about. So there's the approach to every child being able to experience school sport. But there is other ways you can do that. There will be some schools that are signed up to every event, and that's great. But a lot of it's just knowing the right person. So are you being invited to the events? Are the coordinators of those events giving fair opportunity out to all the schools, or do they have their favourites? And thinking about that side, we at uSports actually often run our own competitions where it'll just be like a year 3 and 4 football tournament, or even sometimes we go, right, we're going to do a year 3 football tournament or a year 5 football tournament or a year 1 football tournament. Because what happens is when you go year 1 and 2 or year 3 and 4, you often get all the year 2s come and all the year 4s come, because obviously they're older, they're a little bit more experienced. And sometimes what happens is a child competes quite a lot in year 2, and then they don't compete as much in year 3, and then they compete a lot more in year 4. And that's something that you can try and break up as well, both in school and out of school as well. So I'd definitely consider that. But maybe you've got some other ideas. If you have, if you're watching on YouTube, you can obviously put that in the comments. And whilst I'm on that, just wherever you're listening to this, just give us a follow or a like or whatever. Just shows the algorithm that it's good content and that you've made it halfway through the podcast, which is good. Anyway, so that's school sport. I think it's just important, again, as a PE teacher, that your school is actually implementing school sport and there's competitive opportunities within your school. But then as a sports coach to, again, understand the term school sport. It doesn't count as a a 10-minute match at the end of your PE lesson. It needs to be a more structured, like more of an event, more of a fixture, I think, personally, to count as school sport, for it to really count for something. And then you've got physical activity. And physical activity is an area which gets talked about a lot at the moment. And the reason for that is because we're going through a stage. I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but I think it's something like 1 in 7 children are coming into school in foundation or year 1 as obese. And by the time they're leaving in year 6, 1 in 4 children are obese. So between 4 and 11, you're seeing a lot of children putting on a lot of weight. And we know that physical activity plays a part of that, but also really a lot of it will come down to the food that they're eating. But physical activity will obviously play its part within it. There's more and more research coming out to say that it's more to do with the food. It's almost like 95% food and 5% on activity. And activity is more about strengthening your muscles and your bones and your cardiovascular system and everything else like that. But it's still important to place physical activity as a really important part of the school day, because the guidance from the government is that every child should be active for at least 60 minutes a day. And active counts as walking, a jog, playing in the playground. So I just think that's so achievable. And a lot of you guys listening to this will probably look back at your own childhood and think, I was probably active about 4 or 5 hours a day. So an hour a day should be achievable, and a school can make that quite achievable. So there's different ways that you can do that, and you see it in, I've said an hour a day. That's in a whole 24 hours. But in school, your school should be giving children the opportunity to be active for at least 30 minutes a day. And 30 minutes, what does that look like? Well, maybe it's having structured sports activities at lunchtime. It might be that you have active maths, or the daily mile. The daily mile is where a lot of schools, you might have it already. You have a track within your school that children either walk, jog, or run around the track, and they do a mile every day. So it's just like every class gets 15 minutes out of curriculum time to go and be active. Even just within lessons, how could you get children up on their feet? And I went into one school and I couldn't understand it. I went in, I said, "Oh right, so would anybody like to tell me a rule they know about hockey, for example?" And a kid just stood up. Well, it wasn't just one kid; it was like 15 kids stood up, and I was like, "Hang on, what's going on here? Why have 15 kids just all stood up at once?" And it's because they don't put their hand up in the school; they stand up instead. And there's some incredible research. I don't know where it is. I should probably find it out. Where throughout that child's time within that school, they are so much more active than if they were to just put their hands up. And it's just like little changes like that schools can make to help children be more active. And we know as well that when children are active and they have a positive like movement break at the start of or not a movement break, but they have a lot of movement throughout the day, it helps them to focus on their learning as well. So it's sort of like a win-win for the school and for the kids. But yeah, it's just thinking physical activity, really just thinking about, right, is every child within your school being active for 30 minutes a day? And if not, what could you do to get more children active, basically? So that sort of takes us to the end of understanding what a PESSPA is. But like I say, I've wanted to put this together because it's a sector that we all are working in, and half the time people just don't actually understand what PESSPA is or know what it is. And it's quite simple, really. It makes sense because, walking to school isn't the same as being in a gymnastics PE lesson. It's a different type of movement, although it's all within the same sector. So PE, physical education, school sport, and physical activity. That is the PESSPA sector. There are so many different ways to break down PESSPA. I've sort of scratched the surface of this topic, but it's a good one for anyone, especially if you're a little bit newer to the sector and just sort of understanding it a little bit better. But hopefully you have enjoyed today's podcast. Again, I'm trying to make these podcasts just nice and relaxed, nice and easy to listen to. And it comes out every Thursday, 3 p.m. So if you get in the habit of listening to this podcast on your way home on a Thursday, and hopefully if you enjoy it, give it a follow, give it a like, because it just means that we get more ears and eyes on the podcast, and hopefully one day we'll be able to bring in much bigger guests within the sports coaching sector. I've had a few people reach out already about wanting to become a guest on the podcast, and you'll be pleased to hear as well that I have just set up the other mic, and I was having a right nightmare. Even just with one mic, it was a nightmare trying to get the audio in sync with the video and to make sure it all works. But then trying to record two mics at the same time is an absolute nightmare. I spent probably a good part of 4 or 5 hours trying to get the right software and the right microphones and everything in place to be able to do it. But I've got it now, and it means I've got a platform to invite more guests on, and I'm thinking I might bring on a few of our different teams. So it might be that we bring in the schools manager or our education manager, or even like some of our coaches, our newer coaches, or more experienced coaches, just anybody who's within the sector and got a story to tell. I think that's a really important part of podcasts, is that we get that two-way communication as well. So if you've got any, if you're interested in being on the podcast, let me know. But I am going to put them all in person. I want them to be good quality. I want them to be, you can see that human interaction and stuff. So yeah, so as a reminder, we are out on YouTube. So feel free to go over to YouTube and subscribe. If you haven't seen it already, we're also doing weeklies. So every week on a Sunday at 6 a.m, you get a highlight of everything that happened in the week. So we've done 2 of them so far. So feel free to go and check them out. And the podcast itself is on Spotify. It's going to be on Apple very soon. You might already be listening to this on Apple, and it's out on Amazon Music as well, and Audible. So yeah, hopefully we keep getting those viewers up and get positive feedback in. But like I say, all I can ask you to do is like and share, and I'll be ready to go next Tuesday for our next topic. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.